Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our May webinar, Developing a Written Communication Strategy. My name is Chris Hawks. I'm a training specialist for AmeriCorps Vista and an RPCV, or Returned Peace Corps volunteer, serving in Belize from 2010 to 12. I'll be your host for today's webinar, and today we have the pleasure of two guest presenters. I'm joined by Alyssa Vital, who lives in Portland, Oregon, and works as a writer and editor for Education Northwest. Also with us today is Eric Stiefvater, who also lives in Portland and works at Education Northwest as a learning designer. Both Alyssa and Eric are former Vista members. Love having Vista alum on, so great to have them. They have experience working in communications for nonprofit organizations and have contributed to the development of many training products and experiences for Vista members, Vista leaders, and sponsors, including this webinar today. So very thankful to have Alyssa and Eric today, and we'll hear from them in just a second. But first, just quickly want to look at our session goals. So today, we hope you will leave the webinar with a greater general understanding of how to write in a professional context, as well as specific knowledge about how to identify an appropriate medium for a written communication. Also, best approaches for writing an effective email to your supervisor. And during the session, we'll be referring to and working with a session handout that we'll post in the chat. You see Misty just posted that as a Word document in the chat. This handout was also emailed out this morning if you registered for this webinar in advance. We hope this handout is helpful for your work as a Vista, and you can also use it to take notes on things we talk about today. As always, we are here to support you throughout and after the webinar, so please let us know if you have any questions or are having any difficulty accessing this resource. So with that, I want to bring in our guests, Eric and Alyssa. Eric, I'll pass it to you first. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody. Communication is a tool with which we as humans exercise our influence on others, bring out changes in our and others' attitudes, motivate the people around us, and establish and maintain relationships with them. We communicate with each other in different contexts through verbal, nonverbal, and written means. Sometimes communication can lead to misunderstandings, some of which can be funny, such as the parody of corporate communication shown on the screen, but sometimes they can be serious. Today, we're going to focus on a specific communication context and implementation, that is, written communication in a professional context. Now, it might seem a little old school to talk about written communication in a time when we have social media and video chats and short form videos, but much communication and collaboration in a workplace still happens through written forms, including emails and chat tools, not to mention policies and procedures and reports and memos and other more formal written documents, some of which some of you were describing that you work on in the chat. So thanks for sharing that experience with us. And in fact, ironically, as more of us are collaborating on projects through telework and teleservice, written communication is becoming even more salient as more people work together across distance and time. Facility in professional writing is critical for many Vista tasks and is a useful skill for life and work after Vista. So we look forward to spending time with you today exploring this important skill. But first, we want to get a little bit of a better sense of your work in this area. So I'll turn it back to Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So yeah, as Eric mentioned before we get started, we want to invite everyone to just take a moment to answer this quick poll question on your comfort level with writing in a workplace setting. So you should see a poll pop up on your screen in just a second. Simple question, how would you describe your comfort level, a Likert scale, in terms of writing in a workplace setting, going from very uncomfortable all the way up to very comfortable? I'm seeing some responses in the chat. That's totally fine. If you don't see the poll pop up for any reason, yeah, feel free to log your answer in the chat. Thanks, everyone. This will be pretty quick. It already looks like many have responded, so give it another 5 seconds. We'll count down a little drum roll, and yeah, let's close it out and take a look. Okay, wow, we have a third are very comfortable. That's great to hear. Definitely want to hear your words of wisdom, words of advice in the chat throughout today. You can help with your Vista colleagues. And then we have, a mix, as you can see throughout the rest. Another third, maybe somewhat comfortable. And then very few are very uncomfortable. That's good to know. This is actually, helpful for us as we go through the presentation, just to get a feel for where you're at. So thank you so much for your participation there. I'll pass it to Alyssa now. Hi, Alyssa, and welcome.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, thanks to everyone for sharing your experience level. It's great to see so many of you feel comfortable, but also great to see that there's some people who are kind of testing something new out here today. And don't worry if you don't feel comfortable writing in a professional setting just yet. Like any skill, writing is something you can get better at the more you practice. Even those of us who do it professionally are constantly discovering new ways to improve. And today we hope you can learn from our experience and apply that to your Vista projects. Professional communication, which includes written communication, is at the root of every organization's work. It allows you to share ideas and plans effectively with your coworkers, clients, community partners, funders, and more.
And professional writing is also a useful transferable skill. It can demonstrate your knowledge and credibility. It can help inform and persuade others and improve workplace operations. And of course, many employers get their first impression of future employees through writing skills displayed in resumes, cover letters, email communications, and social media presence. So growing your skills in professional writing as a Vista member will not only help you serve effectively now, but will continue to pay you dividends after Vista service. They can help you seek out and secure a job or career after Vista, build your professional network, and support your continued professional growth. For those of you who will go back to college or graduate school after serving, your improved writing skills can help you write more effective application essays, papers, and dissertations. While we can overthink it or make it highly technical, effective communication in any form ultimately boils down to a simple process of figuring out what you want to say, to whom, and how. This simple framework, what, who, how, is useful whether you're communicating with one person or 1,000 and in a personal or a professional context.
Now that we discussed the general essence of effective communication, let's explore how to implement that in a professional setting. When you need to share an important message about your project or your organization, it's helpful to know exactly what you want to communicate, with whom, and how. A communication plan is one tool that can help you outline the what, the who, and the how of your messaging. It helps you be intentional about what you want to say and who you want to say it to. With a communication plan, you can identify your target audience and develop a message that resonates with them. A communication plan also helps you identify the best channels for delivering your message. It can help you stay on track and ensure that everyone involved in your project is working towards the same goals.
As Chris mentioned earlier, we have a handout that provides a template for a communication plan. A screenshot of that plan is shown on the slide there. Our LSI producer will go ahead and paste the link to the handout in the chat again. Thank you for doing that, as you'll want your own copy of the handout for an upcoming activity. Our producer will now also share the screen and open up a copy of the communication plan template and help us walk you through it. We won't have enough time in today's session to go fully through all 8 parts in detail, but we did want to spend a few minutes looking at each of the parts briefly. And then in a moment, we'll have you take a moment and look closer at the first couple of parts. All right, thank you. Okay, so this is the first page of the document you have access to. It's got a series of steps on the first page. You can see there a table of contents. And again, this is a formal way of thinking through a communication effort or initiative, whether simple or complex. And even if this is a little more sophisticated than what you need, it's always a helpful tool to help you think through, as Alyssa said, that flow from what do I want to say, who do I want to say it to, and how. So with that, we'll go ahead and take a look at the first page, or it's actually the second page. It's the purpose and goal. So this is where you identify and describe your communication goal or goals. That is, what is the purpose of your communication? We provided a few samples there, or examples of what that could look like. On the next page, page 3, we have the audiences section. And this is an important section. It helps you identify and profile your broad primary audience and specific target audiences, as well as secondary audiences that can affect or influence your primary audiences. So the example here comes from some work we did with mentoring programs a few years ago. For them, it was important to recruit men of color who could be good candidates to mentor middle school youth. And so as we worked with them, we helped them kind of narrow that further to a specific target audience, which were men of color working for or attached to schools or other youth serving organizations. So that would be people like coaches or bus drivers or teachers or school volunteers. And the thinking there is that presumably these men of color, hopefully, like working with young people. And then as a side benefit, often people in those professional youth serving roles have also been screened and run through background checks. So it saves a little bit of steps on the safety screening that mentoring programs have to do. And then finally, the secondary audience were, if we could just go back briefly. The secondary audience here were people who work with or know or are family or friends of men of color who might make good mentoring candidates, because there are people that you might, in this case, they wanted to reach out to as well to help persuade or influence their target audience to follow up and volunteer to be a mentor for middle school youth. Okay, now we can go to the next page. The messaging section. This is where you articulate any high-level messages to be delivered to your primary audience and specific messaging to any particular audiences. We provided a sample here. Obviously, this is going to be specific to your own organization and communication need. So, this isn't a formula that may work for everyone. Only you will know what works best for you based on your analysis and the rest of the plan. But here's a little example to kind of prod your thinking a bit. On the next page, page 5, we have you think about communication resources. So these are the tools and materials you will need to communicate your messages to your target audiences. So these could be paper-based tools if you're recruiting through flyers or posters or newsletters, or it could be electronic tools and resources such as social media accounts, or website access, or email survey tool, all that good stuff. On the next page, we take a look at the communication media. So this is where you think about where you're going to deploy those communication resources to deliver the message to the audience that you want to reach to pursue your communication goal. So again, this could be print or electronic. It could be event-based. Maybe you hold meetings out in the community, etc. So whichever way you want to reach your target audiences, we document them here. On page 7, it's always good to think a little bit about risk management, and in this case, any potential obstacles and emergencies that might come up in the course of your communication. So this could be things like technical difficulties or lack of resources, or if you're doing a lot of online recruitment, things like cyberbullying or cybersecurity, issues around online moderation, etc. On page 8, this is where you document who's going to do what by when to help you carry out your communication plan or strategy or messaging. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated, as you can see. This is just a simple table you can use or adapt as you see fit. And then finally, the last page of the document describes how you will monitor and evaluate the implementation and impact of your communication activity. So if we could just take a quick look at that real quick. So yes, as in any effort that benefits from continuous improvement, you want to spend time thinking about what you've done, what went well, what didn't go well, and how you're going to do things differently next time. And for this, you can use things like, number of responses you got if you're doing a recruitment campaign, for example, or feedback surveys, or if you're doing online campaigns, you can get website and email analytics, social media impressions, etc. So again, we threw this together based on some previous work Alyssa and I have done for other organizations, and we think it's a useful way to be thoughtful about communicating what you want to whom and how. And we'd like to give you a chance to play with it for a little bit. We will go back to our slides and we'll have you all take a look at the handouts and do a little something with it, and Chris will tell us what that is.
Thanks so much, Eric. So yeah, right now we just want to take a moment to reflect on what we've talked about so far and give you a chance to try out the template. So if you take a look at the handout that Eric was just referencing, and in the chat again, we'll share the link to the handout one more time. There's a link, and we'll also attach it in the chat as well. We'd like to give you a little time to experiment with the communication plan template. So if you take a look at the prompt on the slide for a moment, we'd like you to consider your Vista project and a communication you might need or want to send. Identify the communication goal and audience. So for this, write your responses on the first and second pages of the handout where you see the spaces for the goal and audience. That is, think about one or more communication goals you might have for your Vista project or your sponsoring organization, and write the goal or goals on page 1 of the handout. Similarly, think about one or more audiences for your project or sponsoring organization that you want to communicate with, and list the audience or audiences on page 2 of the handout. So for the goals, we'd like you to think about what is the purpose of your communication. For the audiences, consider not only broad primary audience, but also the specific target audience, as well as any secondary audiences that can have an impact. So what we'll do is we'll give you a couple of minutes to work on this, after which we'll come back and invite you to share what you wrote in the chat. Or if you finish early, please feel free to note your response in the chat as well. That's totally fine. And if you're having any trouble opening the handout, or if you'd prefer to just write your thoughts down on a piece of paper or think through the prompt in your head, please feel free to do so. We'll keep the Q&A open for questions as well, but we will we'll pause the webinar for the next couple of minutes so that you can focus on those first 2 parts of the plan. So we'll play a little light music, just give you some time to write and reflect. I'll give a good 30-second countdown reminder for when we'll start to come back and bring us back to the webinar. So I'll be quiet, and again, if you need the handout, look for it in the chat. We'll share it again. we'll give it maybe another 30 seconds or so. And again, if you finish with your goal, oh, I see Kathy, thanks for sharing. If you finish, go ahead and share it in the chat, but we'll give it about another 30 seconds. Okay, thanks everyone, and welcome back. Thank you so much for participating in this activity. Did see just now, looks like there were a couple who mentioned they couldn't access the handout. If not, that's totally okay, and we apologize. We'll share it again. Looks like Misty just shared the handout again in the chat. Hopefully that works for you. But I also promise that we'll follow up after the webinar with the handout as well. So you will have it on hand, and we'll post it to the campus as well. But yeah, we want to know how it went with the reflection activity. Like to see what you came up with for a communication goal and/or audience or audiences for your VISTA project or sponsoring organization. Want to hear what's going on at your site. So see some already mentioning in the chat, and if you'd like, go ahead and feel free to share something of what you wrote in your handout. And just give me a second as I'm scrolling through, just kind of taking a look through some of the goals and audiences mentioned. I see Michelle mentioned to solicit success story in order to lead to craft and distribute about our local partners. Ellie needs to recruit local experts to lend knowledge and possibly lead workshops, programs with our organization. I'm seeing a lot of goals mentioned. Oh, and then, okay, so Juliet followed up with several audience assumptions, where there's the student, the undergraduate, which could be the undergraduate, underclassmen, on-campus residents, variable availability, so multiple commitments, work study, part job, looking for professional or personal development and socializing opportunities. Identifying those audiences is key. I love it, Juliet, in terms of the primary, secondary, and, that target audience that it looks like you've really nailed down there. Seeing several more goals here. Eric and Alyssa, I know the chat's going fast, but if you see any that we should absolutely identify, if you see the goal and audience combination would be great, just to kind of see those back to back. I'm still scrolling, and I just want to say I appreciate everyone sharing here.
Yeah, this is really great to see everyone's projects. I'm seeing a lot of really specific audiences, which is great. And that's what you want to be doing. Because once you identify specifically who you're talking to, it makes it much easier to identify what channels you're going to use and how you're going to find them. Just saying, you want to reach everyone is like a great theory, but it's much more helpful to be specific. And it's okay if your audience isn't everyone. It's really good to be specific to have the most impact with how you're communicating. So just really think about narrowing it down if you haven't done that already.
Yeah, this process helps you narrow down to where you can best use your resources, which in some cases for some of you as Vistas may just be your own time. So it's not possible for you to reach everyone or work 24/7, 365 days a year to reach all potential audiences. So it's a matter of identifying the people that you most want to connect with, and then think about what it is that's important to them and who are some other audiences that can help you reach that target audience. So yeah, as Alyssa said, I appreciate that people are getting really specific in some of that audience analysis. So yeah, so we hope that template is useful for you. So in the template are examples we pulled from different organizations we worked with. Obviously, everything needs to be completely customized to your own project. We just thought it would be useful to give a start of some examples from things that we've worked with in the past. And it looks like everyone kind of picked up on that and ran with it. So this is really interesting to see. And again, I'm always impressed at all the different things that Vistas do and who they're helping and where they're serving. So thank you.
Yeah, agreed, Eric. It truly is impressive. So I just want to say thanks to everyone. Definitely looks like you put a lot of thought into this. Certainly hope you found the handout helpful. And again, we'll follow up with the handout for anyone who maybe could not have accessed it just now. We will make sure you get access to it. But also with this handout, we hope it's something you can continue filling out after this webinar. If it can help you with an actual communication event or activity that you are responsible for at your site, you can also keep it handy, for future use, of course. If your sponsoring organization has a communications team, perhaps you could also talk to them about how they go about planning communication activities and what tools and processes they use. So thank you so much. Thank you for sharing as well. And yeah, I'll turn it back over to Alyssa and Eric now.
Great, thanks, Chris. So a communication plan, as you just experimented with, is a sophisticated tool and is definitely useful for larger communications needs and goals, such as planning out a social media campaign, planning marketing for an event or an initiative, or creating an internal communication plan to inform or educate the employees of a large organization. But again, a communication plan ultimately just adds more details and accountability to the essential questions of what do we want to say, to whom, and how. So we're now going to spend some time examining other examples of how taking those guiding questions of what, who, and how applies to making other workplace communications more effective.
So first up, we have email. Again, email may seem a little old school for those of us who live on social media or texting, but email is still a really important way to communicate with colleagues and external audiences. Using email best practices like those listed on the slide conveys a professional image of you and your organization. These best practices help you create emails that are direct and concise so you can convey your message quickly. Let's take a look at how one Vista member puts these best practices into practice in an email to their supervisor. Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, so one thing we at Vista hear from Vista supervisors is that Vista members sometimes maybe need help with workplace communication. Now, this can include communicating with your supervisor about project work and your professional needs. Supervisors are people too, not scary ogres, but sometimes Vista members can lack confidence in asking their supervisors for what they need. And hey, maybe that's due to being new at the site, maybe just still familiarizing themselves with the workplace culture. Either way, it can help to make sure your communications with your supervisor are clear and well thought out. So we wanted to show this email, and in it, you see Vista member Louisa is asking for help from her supervisor, Tanya. And looking through it, we can see how she used the tips from the previous slide when drafting this email. Louisa needs help preparing for a community outreach fair. She does a great job of keeping the message brief and to the point. She gives important context about the situation and makes a clear ask for feedback from Tanya with a link to the relevant document as well. Always helpful to include that link when possible. Now, there are no typos, and Louisa used simple language in her own voice to communicate what she needs and when she needs it by. But overall, you can tell Louisa considered who she was tailoring her message to and adjusted the tone accordingly. So we just wanted to share, it's a great example here from Louisa, incorporating many of those tips that Alyssa just mentioned on the previous screen. But I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Alyssa to discuss the next example of effective professional written communication. Hey, Alyssa.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, yeah, so our next example is an external marketing piece that would be used to recruit volunteers. This example comes from Outside In, which is an organization that supports youth experiencing homelessness through various services, including providing meals. In this example, Outside In posted a recruitment message on a local volunteer hub. This website is exclusively for sharing volunteer opportunities, so we already know that people coming to this website would be in the target audience of people who are interested in volunteering. This post talks to those people who want to make a difference by highlighting the impact of the volunteer opportunity. In the title of the post, you can see it says what the volunteer will do and how they will make an impact by providing healthy meals to homeless youth. The post also shares the organization's mission with an explicit sentence about how the volunteer will support that mission. The last sentence of this paragraph says, "You help build the foundation for our clients' health, development, and self-sufficiency." The post also talks about potential benefits to volunteers, which include community, connection, a safe working environment, welcoming anyone of any skill level, and the opportunity to volunteer with friends. And it also shares specific details about expectations and time commitment. All of these things are things that a potential volunteer would want to know. Being concise, specific, and clear is especially crucial when communicating professionally on social media. Limited screen space, character limits, and short attention spans require you to keep your message short and sweet. Of course, being funny and having personality can help your message be liked and reach more people, but trying to be too on trend or witty can backfire. I'm sure all of us can think of examples of organizations or companies that have done that. So it's really better to just get your message across rather than wasting time trying to get social media clout or likes. And always, if your organization has rules or expectations for using social media or specific staff members assigned to manage social media, be sure to follow their instructions first. So let's jump into this example. Let's say you're a volunteer coordinator and you want to recruit help for a community garden day. And side note, this was actually my service as a Vista member. I was a volunteer coordinator and we did community garden days. So this might be especially relevant for some of you. This volunteer opportunity could be of interest to people of all ages and abilities, especially since it's just a one-time commitment. So you want to post it on all of your organization's social media platforms. Ideally, you'd start by creating a graphic that shows volunteers working in the community garden or just a garden in general. Include text with a sign up link in the image if you want people to sign up ahead of time, and then you can use that image across all your social media platforms. Then you could tweak post content for each platform. So first up is Facebook. Facebook posts have much more space for text and details, so it's okay that these posts would be a bit longer than others. Next, you have Twitter. Twitter has a more strict character limit, so it's good to be brief here. If you include an image, having that URL in text embedded in the image can help you save space and characters. And last, we have Instagram. Since Instagram is mostly visual, it's really important that the image you use will resonate with people. You could include multiple photos of volunteers at past garden days to show potential volunteers what they might expect. Also, remember that people can't click on URLs in captions of Instagram posts. I see people do that all the time and you can't access the link. So remember to include the URL embedded in text on an image that you post, or put the URL in your bio if you can, either directly or through a Linktree account if someone at your organization will update that. Our next example is a bit more complex. I saw some of you in the chat already say that you're responsible for helping write grants and proposals. This is a specialized form of professional writing that could be a whole separate webinar. And in fact, it has been in the past. Check out the Vista campus for more materials on grant writing and resource development. But even with grant writing, you need to know what you want to say, to whom, and how. First, the what. In grant proposals, you are essentially trying to tell the funder how you will use their money to make a positive impact. You can do this by highlighting your organization's background and history. Talk about programs or projects you have run that were effective and what impact they had on the community. Now the who. Your audience in a grant proposal is the funder. So that might be a foundation, a company with a community grant program, or even an individual donor. Before you write, think about the specific funder you're writing to and what's important to them. What type of work do they fund? How does your work align with their priorities and values? And finally, the how. One really effective way to show the funder how you can make an impact is by telling stories about your organization's past work and the people you have helped. You can also be effective by using simple language and direct action verbs wherever possible. Grant proposals often have a word or character limit, so that means it's especially important to be clear and concise here.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. And thank you, Eric, as well. And I know we've covered quite a bit of ground and provided you with a lot of information and examples today. So with that, we want to take a moment for a quick review and opportunity to really apply some of what we've been talking about. And we'll do that with a scenario you see here on the screen. The scenario is, you drafted a communication plan for the launch of a new service. You need leadership to sign off on it. And you want to ask your supervisor to help circulate the plan to all who need to review it. So in just a moment, a poll should pop up on your screen asking you to select which of the 3 emails, A, B, or C, that you see on the screen makes the ask most effectively. We'll give this a good, 30 seconds to a minute because I know there is some text to read there in terms of which email is correct. Play some light music. If the poll does not pop up, feel free to answer in the chat, but hopefully it does for everyone. Just give it a second and I'll be quiet while you answer. Give it another 10 seconds or so. Hey, thank you so much. Like we're slowing down, so we will go ahead and close the poll, and let's do that and check out the answer. So great job. Many of you got this correct. We suggest the best answer is B, which 85% of you also suggested. And that's because in B, it really provides a descriptive subject line, provides a clear and succinct ask, and provides the supervisor with easy access through, it provides the attachment to help out, which is the document Louisa wants her supervisor to forward along to others. It also clearly provides a date, a specific date that they would like the supervisor to provide that information by. So thank you so much for your responses there. And just moving on, just want to say thank you for your participation throughout this webinar today. We hope, in addition to gaining a useful tool in the communication plan that Eric and Alyssa went through, that template, you also know more about how to identify an appropriate medium for a written communication and can feel more confident in communicating and writing with your supervisor. Now, in a moment, we'll have time for some Q&A with Eric and Alyssa if you have any follow-up questions. So please, we encourage you to take time now to share any questions you have about ideas you are exploring for your site. Please share that using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to those in just a second. Now, as you are learning more about professional communication, we would encourage you to check out the resources mentioned on this screen for further information on the topics we covered today. Now, these resources can also be found on the last page of the handout as well, if you scroll to the bottom of that handout. So again, we'll share that handout in the chat one more time here, but again, we'll also be posting this to the campus as well. Just a friendly reminder that we will, again, have this recording, the handout, the slides, all posted to the Vista campus in just a day or two. Usually we have it up in 24 hours by tomorrow afternoon, and we'll send a follow-up email once that's done. So you'll just need to navigate to the campus at learn.americorps.gov and log in. Once logged in, you can click on Catalog where you see the red square on the screen. That'll bring you to the list of learning paths available. Today's webinar will be posted under the My Professional Development Learning Path. So you can either search for that or you can filter by members. On the left-hand side, there's a filter feature. And if it's your first time accessing the learning path, you'll have to enroll and join it, which is just a quick couple of steps, very fast. Once you've joined the learning path, you can then browse through all of the recorded webinars at your leisure. So also, please take a moment to share your feedback on this webinar. We are always reviewing the content. We're working to make it better for Vista members for future webinars. So we appreciate your ideas for how it can be improved, what worked, what didn't, ideas for future webinars as well. So just ask you to take a couple of moments. It's a quick survey and complete that. It looks like, yes, thanks, Misty. Misty just shared a link to the evaluation in the chat, but it also should pop up in your browser as you exit out of Zoom. So with that being said, we're going to move on to Q&A, and let's see. I'm just opening up the Q&A, and I would again encourage everyone to continue to post any questions there. And Eric and Alyssa, as I'm pulling up this, I just want to check if you've seen any pop up in the Q&A that you'd want to address.
Yeah, I see one in here from Annika. The question is, what is the best way to create an attractive or exciting email title without sounding like spam, specifically when sending on behalf of an organization to volunteers? So I think email subject lines can be a little tricky. I think just because people get so many, it's hard to stand out sometimes, but especially with volunteer emails, I've found that one of the best ways is to phrase the subject as like the way you're inviting them to participate. So thinking about what motivates a volunteer, maybe it's like supporting young people in schools, or maybe they're more motivated by like connecting with the community at a fundraising event or something. Depending on what the specific event is that you're inviting them to, I would try to think about what their motivation is and then write the email that way. So often, like, I feel like it's easy to fall on words like support or help, but you might think about ways that you're actively using a verb that's inviting them to kind of participate. You can also sometimes like test out different subject lines and see what resonates with people, what people respond to. And I think if all else fails, if you have a few volunteers that you work with closely, it never hurts to ask them like what sounds helpful to them. I think sometimes we forget that we can ask people for input, especially on just, it's so hard to want to seem like an expert in everything. And I think getting feedback from the people that you're talking to can be one of the most helpful and direct ways to get feedback on what works for them.
Thanks so much, Alyssa.
I was just going to say, it looks like a helpful participant also pointed us to a list in the chat of words that can trigger spam filters. So that helps as well. And then I think to reinforce also Alyssa's earlier point, yeah, if you can be funny or exciting, that's great. But, it's most important that you reach the people you want to reach and motivate them in the way that they want to be motivated, as you described. So, I'd like to think that I'm funny, but I know that I'm not. So I just try to, what is the shortest way I can say something to get people to do what I want them to do?
Thank you both. Starting to see questions pop in, and I see a really good one here. Okay, so in most cases, organizations have voices. When creating a communication plan, which voice should we use? The organization's voice or the individual's voice? Eric, any opinions on that?
I think it depends on the specific communication. If it's an official communication that's meant to represent the organization, then you would speak from that perspective. And that's where you might want to make sure that you have someone who reviews your work, whether it's communication staff at the organization or your supervisor or someone up in leadership who really understands the context and really kind of can take on literally the voice of that organization. That person might be you, but it's always good to check with folks higher up, especially if it's something that is important or potentially high risk in your communication.
Thanks so much, Eric, and totally agreed. It's just kind of a depends, but still good to hear kind of the context on what it may depend on. Thank you so much. Another question, what are some recent trends you're seeing in professional communication in the workplace? Eric or Alyssa, any trends?
I think one that we mentioned earlier on was that move towards more remote working or telework or teleservice. So a lot of people, actually the organization that Eric and I work at, we have relatively recently, so after the onset of the pandemic, we started to be a national organization, and people now we work with from all over the country. So people aren't always online at the same time. So that means that we're often communicating in more asynchronously, so over emails or Slack messages. And sometimes I think a channel like Slack, or some people use Microsoft Teams, can feel a little more informal. And it's easier to kind of dash off messages to people. But I think actually, as we're not online at the same time and we're communicating at different times, it's actually even more important to be really clear and direct about what you need from people, because they're just getting a barrage of emails and messages on so many platforms for work, not to mention their personal life. So yeah, I think it's really important to be mindful about how much you're communicating and just being really clear with how you're talking to people, understanding that everyone has all these competing demands on their time.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. Great advice. Also seeing a question here. This might be another it depends, but just want to address it from Nina, who's asking how do you handle, in professional emails, how do you handle emojis and coworkers who use them? I would say, Nina, a lot of that probably depends on the workplace culture, but just curious, Alyssa or Eric, how, either you personally or in your workplace would handle emojis and email use in a professional workplace setting.
Yeah, I actually had to laugh when I saw this question from Nina because I am one of those coworkers who uses emojis in my emails. Now, that being said, I don't necessarily use an emoji when I'm sending an email to like our executive director, or if I were emailing like a city councilor, I probably wouldn't use an emoji. But if I'm communicating back and forth with one of the people I work really close with on my team, that's just how I communicate. And I think that's something we didn't talk about as much on this webinar, but it's really important to be able to be yourself in your workplace. Sometimes that takes on like a professional sort of setting. It maybe your tone is different when you're talking to your coworkers than with your friends, but you still want to be able to be somewhat of yourself at work. And so I think it's important to find that balance. If you're a person who hates emojis and it really bothers you, hopefully that's something, if you can understand that maybe just that's how that person is expressing their feelings, especially if they aren't working with you in the office. Sometimes people have a hard time connecting over digital communications. So just try to be understanding of other people's needs with communication too. And definitely don't overuse emojis, but I think it's more and more acceptable as long as you're doing it in moderation and like in the right setting.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. Another question, and this is a big one. I think a lot of Vistas ask about or curious about. What are some jobs Vistas could do in the communications field? After they complete their year of service, they're looking for a job in communications. Do you have any specific suggestions, Eric or Alyssa?
Yeah. Well, I personally right now, so I am a former Vista member and I'm working right now in a communications department at a nonprofit. So I think nonprofits, big and small, have specific communications departments. If you're working at a bigger organization, you might specialize in something. Like a national nonprofit might have a role specifically devoted to email marketing. Whereas if you're in a smaller nonprofit, a local nonprofit, maybe you're kind of doing all of the things. So you're writing emails and doing social media and tracking all that. Other communications related roles, fundraising, which almost every nonprofit has, that involves a lot of communication, whether you're writing letters like donation asks to people or doing grant writing. And in some organizations, grant writing is also its own role. But also I think the important thing to underscore is that every professional role in some way relies on communication. So I think there are ways to spin whatever experience you have with communications into a specific nonprofit role, because it applies to everything. But Eric, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, communication, as we said, it's a transferable skill, and whether that's verbal, nonverbal, or written, those are all, we all have to get along to get things done. And so the more practice you have with written communication and other communication, the more effective you'll be as a Vista member, but also as an employee and as a friend and as a community member. So I was just skimming the questions, and a future job for Vista members might be editing ChatGPT messages. We debated whether to mention that. It is interesting how that tool and other future tools that are emerging may change the work of communications staff, but there will always be a need to make sure that however that text is generated, that it is targeted, that it's clear what you want to ask, who you're asking it of, and how you're going to ask that. So maybe some of us who might be writing may convert more to editing roles, but there will always be a need for people to make sure that text is appropriately crafted and directed to get the result that you want.
Thank you so much, Eric and Alyssa. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, so we'll continue to move on. There are another couple of questions in the queue that we'll continue to answer privately, and but so please feel free to hang on, and we'll get those answers. But in the interest of time, we would love to continue the conversation from today's webinar. Just want to mention a great place to do this is on Vista Connect. So you can find Vista Connect on the Vista campus. You can use the topics forum to share best practices and connect with your colleagues about professional communication, for example, and much more. Now, there's a new feature on the campus that allows you to upload resources as well. So any resources you have created at your site, you can share them on Vista Connect with your colleagues, your Vista colleagues. Now, this is located on the Connect side of the campus again. So in the gray menu bar on Vista Connect is the Explore drop-down menu. If you open the Explore menu and select Groups, there's a list of groups, just select Members. So a few steps there, but then you look for the link to resources in the medium blue menu bar towards the right side. You'll see a button to just create resource. So just click that Create Resource button to open the form. And just enter some information about the resource, kind of describe how it can be used and any other notable facts, and then attach a Word doc, Excel sheet, PowerPoint presentation, or PDF, any of those, and just click Save, and your resource will be queued for moderator review. And just once it's approved, we're monitoring constantly. Once approved, it'll appear on the site where you can share with your Vista colleagues. So it's a pretty new feature to the site, but we definitely recommend it so you can be among the first to upload resources and start building the library of tools to share with your peers. It's just one more way the Vista campus can support your service. So I just want to share another, just big thank you to Alyssa and Eric. Such a huge help today. Thank you for sharing your expertise and answering all those questions. It's just so helpful. Thank you to Stephen Bronskill for helping out in the chat and Q&A. Thanks to our partners at LSI, Misty and Stephanie, for sharing the links in the chat quite a few times. I know that was so helpful. On behalf of all of us at AmeriCorps, I also want to just give a big thank you to you, the Vista member, for all of you Vistas out there doing the work in your communities, and for your participation today on this webinar. We see you and we thank you for your service and wish you all the success in the world this year. This concludes today's webinar, so feel free to log off. But again, thank you for your service.